Well, in his most recent column, the Wall Street Journal's Dan Henninger refers to President Obama as, quote, His Excellency. And he joins us now. So you finally realize how the regalness of the White House and the president, and you've jumped on board.
Yeah, well, most people refer to the president as Mr. President. And in my column, I had a lady referring to him as Your Excellency. She thought it was more appropriate. And it seems to, at this point, to make sense insofar as the president, by and large, is ruling by decree, fiat, and whim. And most of these changes in the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, have simply been the administration changing the rules in the middle of the stream and as they go along. And, eventually you've got to come to the conclusion that Obama has decided he does not need to rule with the consent of the governed. He'll rule however he wishes.
By the way, he's kind of threatened this in the past, so he's kind of warned us that he would do this.
I wrote a column back in July called Obama's Creeping Authoritarianism, and it was based on speeches that he was giving at that time. And here's a quote from one of them. We'll do everything we can, whenever we can, with or without Congress.
When was that?
In July. That was gave a couple of speeches out in the Midwest, and he sort of was sending a signal that if he needed to, he was going to rule by executive order and decree.
But this goes back, if I can, to 2010, when John Podesta, who's just been brought back into the White House, wrote this thing for his organization about how executive orders could essentially rule the country. The ability of President Obama to accomplish important change through these powers should not be underestimated.
Yeah.
So they've been talking about this for a long time.
For a lot longer than that. I mean, it is the inclination, I think, of the political left in the United States to impose their policies rather than wait for the country to catch up with them. That's always been their instinct to use regulatory agencies, say, like the Environmental
Protection. Or czars and all these things. But here's the thing. I read, I think in USA Today, Congress, the most abysmal ratings ever, and a large portion, I had a note here, 2/3 say that this is the worst Congress ever. Doesn't that actually help the president with being, with this sort of, hey, let's skip these do-nothing guys anyway? I mean, it sort of gives him a buffer between outrage with the public.
That might be his argument, Charles, but I think that the Congress, people talk all the time about congressional gridlock. That Congress is elected by the American people and reflects the beliefs and feelings right now of the American people. And the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, as David is reflected in the opinions of the way they want to rule, they are very, very far apart. And that's the reason Congress is gridlocked.
The president's not above. The president's elected, too. And he routinely outsources a fine print to Congress. That's also a problem. But right now we have, when does the president's behavior become unconstitutional? We see now with health reform, the mounting number of delays and changes by the administration to their own law. And people are feeling like, they feel like Alice in Wonderland. We've fallen through the looking glass in this thing. When does it become unconstitutional, the president's activities?
I'm not sure there's a point where it's become so unconstitutional. For one thing, the question would be who would file litigation against it. Back, I think, in late summer, we had a piece on the editorial page by former federal judge Michael McConnell arguing that it is really very difficult to stop a president who wants to rule in this way. There are really no avenues to slow him down other than perhaps public opinion. And public opinion for this president is currently plummeting.
Well, just recently, in the appointment of heads at these different agencies, there wasn't a lot of real pushback, at least. And I was kind of surprised at that. So I'm going to start to give people these jobs, and we'll just take a majority vote instead of having.
As a result of Harry Reid, the nuclear option, they only need a simple majority to get these people into office. And now you've got Richard Cordray at the Consumer Protection Bureau, a new agency with vast authority and powers. Thomas Perez, the new Labor Secretary, who showed no disinclination to use that kind of power when he was at the Justice Department. And we've watched the Environmental Protection Agency and the imposed rules they put on carbon-based utilities. So I think across the board, you're going to see this sort of thing happening.
And now you also have the shock troops. Your letter was written by supposedly an imaginary navigator. You have all these navigators across. People sort of diminish their importance, but the fact is they have a lot of personal information of ours. Who knows what they're going to do with that? And then, of course, you have all those IRS agents who are going to enforce Obamacare. So they've got the shock troops out there.
Yeah. Exactly. And
I mean, that's kind of scary.
Well, redistribution of wealth isn't just wealth going from the wealthy to the poor, but wealth going from the wealthy to favorite friends of the White House. I mean, it's political repayment.
Right, Charles, but that's why there's an equal protection issue under the 14th Amendment, possibly, with the Constitution.